He once said, "I don't believe in instinct, I believe in rules." But the irony was brutal. The very man who mastered discipline was later destroyed by his own emotions. This is the story of Richard Dennis, the man who turned $27,000 into $200 million and then lost almost everything to one invisible enemy, his ego. He didn't lose to the market, he lost to himself. And that's the essence of the art of losing, the art of knowing when greatness becomes blindness. There was a time when everything Dennis touched turned to gold. He saw patterns where others saw noise. He found rhythm in the chaos of prices and panic. He didn't rely on luck, he relied on probability. He didn't trust emotion, he trusted systems. And so the turtle experiment was born. A radical idea that trading, that sacred game of instinct, could, could be taught. He trained ordinary people. No experience, no background. Just rules, logic, and faith in structure. He taught them how to enter, how to exit, how to obey, and they won again and again, until one day Richard Dennis, the man who wrote the rules, could no longer follow them himself. There is a paradox in finance. The longer you are right, the more you begin to believe you cannot be wrong. And when you start believing that, the market will humble you. It always does. That's what happened in 1987. The crash. The turtles stayed calm. They followed the plan. But Dennis didn't. He thought, the market is wrong. He averaged down, refused to surrender, fought to prove his genius. But the market doesn't care about your pride. It doesn't listen to your logic. It reflects only one truth, who you really are. Richard Dennis wasn't just a trader. He was a philosopher of money. He believed humans could be programmed like computers. But he forgot one thing. Computers don't feel. Humans do. When ego wakes, it rewrites the code. It turns logic into faith. And faith in trading is the first step to ruin. I once asked a mentor, why do so many rich people lose everything they've built? He smiled and said, because they think they deserve success instead of earning alignment with its rules. The ones who stay rich are not the most brilliant. They are the most humble. Dennis stopped being humble. He stopped learning. He started defending. He began predicting instead of observing. And in markets, the moment you forget this truth, no one is bigger than the market, that's the moment you start to fall. There was a deeply human moment in his collapse. As prices crashed and screens turned red, he wasn't a legend anymore. He was just a man, trying to hold on to the proof that he was right. The prince of the pit became a witness to his own undoing. He learned the oldest lesson of all: no one wins forever. But that's what makes his story beautiful. Not because he rose so high, but because he fell and understood. He once said, if I could do it again, I'd still teach others. But this time I'd teach them how to lose. Because in finance, only those who know how to lose can survive long enough to win. The art of losing is not about despair. It's about acceptance. Acceptance that every system has limits. Every rule has a breaking point. And every human, no matter how great, will one day be defeated by his own reflection. Someone once asked him, if you knew all the rules to get rich, how did you still lose? Dennis smiled and said, because rules can't save you from yourself. That line holds the entire philosophy of life. In investing, in business, in love, we try to control everything, but the only thing worth controlling is the self. Imagine standing in a vast desert. The wind screams. You have a map, but you believe you remember the way. You put the map down and you get lost. Not because the map was wrong, but because you were too proud to look at it again. The market is that desert. The map is the system. And death is arrogance. Dennis used to say, when a system works, keep using it. When it stops, don't fix it. Stop trading. But in his own life, he didn't stop. He couldn't. And that's why he lost. It sounds cruel, but it's true. The market doesn't reward the smart. It rewards the disciplined. The smart ones think they can't fail. The disciplined ones know they can and act accordingly. I tell this story not to pity Richard Dennis, but to remind us all, even geniuses can drown in their own certainty because the distance between mastery and madness is just one trade too many. Sometimes the art of keeping yourself is far greater than the art of making money. When the world shakes, when your portfolio bleeds, when your faith trembles, remember this: humility doesn't make you smaller. It keeps you alive long enough to grow, because the last to fall is never the weakest one. It's the one who stood too long on the top. The story of Richard Dennis is not just about trading, it's about the psychology of winning and the tragedy of believing you're invincible. In every market cycle, you'll see the same pattern. People rise, they master the rules, they profit, and then they forget why the rules existed in the first place. They think mastery means freedom, but in truth, mastery means surrender. Because every great system, every great method only works as long as the ego stays silent. Dennis was a master of silence once. He could sit through the noise, hold his trades, and trust the math. But as the fortune grew, so did the whisper. You're special. And that whisper turned into a roar. You see, ego never shouts in the beginning. It flatters. It tells you that you've seen what others can't, that you've earned the right to bend the rules, that your intuition is no longer guesswork, it's genius. And that's the moment when discipline dies quietly, long before the account collapses. There's something poetic about how markets mirror the human mind. When you are calm, they reflect order. When you are emotional, they reflect chaos. The screen becomes a mirror, the chart becomes your heartbeat, and every candle is a confession. Dennis once told his students, every trader fights two markets, the external and the internal. The one outside takes your money, the one inside takes your soul. He was right, and yet he forgot to fight the second one himself. In his best years, Dennis was the definition of rationality. He followed the trend. He cut losses. He never hesitated. But then the loss became personal. He stopped seeing numbers. He saw insult. He stopped managing risk. He started managing pain. And when you trade pain, you lose in ways numbers can't describe. I want you to imagine something. Imagine a man standing in front of 10 glowing monitors, his eyes red from exhaustion, his finger hovering over the mouse. He's watching millions evaporate, every tick another cut. He whispers to himself, it'll come back, it has to come back. But the market doesn't come back. It doesn't comfort you. It doesn't apologize. It just moves indifferent, cold, eternal. And that's when the greatest traders learn the hardest truth. The market is not your enemy. It's your teacher. And the lesson is always the same. You are not in control. When Dennis finally stepped away, it wasn't with bitterness. It was with clarity. He saw that success had become his cage. He built rules to control chaos, but ended up trapped inside his own creation. He realized that the purpose of rules was never to make you rich. It was to keep you sane. There's a quiet dignity in falling, because only when you fall, you hear the silence that success used to drown. You start to understand that losing is not the opposite of winning. It's a part of it. Without loss, there's no humility. Without humility, there's no growth. And that's the strange beauty of the art of losing. It teaches you to bow before you break, to yield before you shatter, to let go before it's taken. Dennis used to talk about probabilities. He said, trading is not about being right, it's about staying alive. That's the paradox most people never grasp. They chase the thrill of victory, not the longevity of wisdom. They celebrate profits, not survival. But the real players, the ones who last decades, they know the truth. The market doesn't pay for brilliance, it pays for endurance. Think of a mountain climber. Every step upward is risk. Every inch higher, thinner air, weaker ground. The danger is not in climbing, it's in believing you've conquered the mountain. Because the moment you stop respecting the height is the moment gravity reminds you who's boss. Dennis stopped respecting the climb. He reached the summit and thought the rules no longer applied to him. But rules are like gravity. You can't see them, but they always win. In a rare interview years later, he said something that stuck with me. He said, success is dangerous. It makes you mistake luck for skill and timing for talent. That line is worth writing on every trading desk in the world. Because once you start confusing outcomes with identity, you've already begun your descent. Ego tells you that you earned the win. Wisdom tells you that you survived the loss. Ego builds castles, wisdom builds foundations, and only one of them survives the storm. Let's step outside trading for a moment. Look at life itself. We rise, we learn, we win, we build identities. And then, when life changes, we fight it. We resist, we deny, we try to prove that we are still the person we once were. But time, like the market, doesn't care about your story. It only cares about your adaptability. Richard Dennis's downfall wasn't a failure of intelligence. It was a failure of adaptation. He couldn't evolve from the man who created the system to the man who could let it go. And isn't that true for all of us? We hold on too tightly to careers, to habits, to old identities that once defined us. We forget that growth often requires loss, that surrender is not weakness, it's wisdom. The market punishes arrogance, but life punishes resistance. And if you don't learn how to lose gracefully, you'll lose everything painfully. So maybe the art of losing is not about trading at all. Maybe it's a philosophy for living, to know when to stop, when to walk away, when to admit that you were wrong, not because you failed, but because you grew. That's the hardest form of intelligence, emotional intelligence, and that's the wisdom Richard Dennis paid millions to learn. In the end, he didn't disappear. He stayed quiet, wrote, taught, and reflected. He found peace not in the charts, but in clarity. He understood that mastery is not about control, it's about awareness. It's about knowing the limits of your power and the infinite reach of your pride. If there's one thing to take from his story, it's this. When you win, don't build a throne, build a mirror. Look at yourself, not as a hero, but as a student, because the day you stop being a student is the day your empire begins to crumble. The market doesn't care who you are, it only cares how you behave. And that's the ultimate truth of the art of losing. In the silence after the fall, Richard Dennis found something more valuable than wealth: perspective. He began to understand that the true cost of success is not measured in dollars, but in detachment. The moment you identify yourself with your results, you've already lost control of who you are, because results are temporary. But identity, that's what the market loves to challenge. He once said, "Losing teaches you what success hides." And he was right. Success hides your weaknesses. It flatters your ego, shields your flaws, and blinds you with validation. Losing rips that away. It leaves you naked, vulnerable, painfully aware. But awareness is the beginning of mastery. There's a strange beauty in the fall of the great. It reminds us that the line between genius and destruction is made of confidence. Too little and you never begin. Too much and you never stop. Dennis began with just enough to challenge the world. He ended with too much to challenge himself. That's the cycle of every empire: build, rise, conquer, collapse, not because the foundation was weak, but because the builder forgot the humility that built it. When Dennis trained the turtles, he told them something few understood. You don't trade the market, you trade your reaction to it. It sounded abstract, but it was the essence of psychology. The market is neutral, it only moves. What hurts you is your attachment to the move, your desire to be right, your refusal to be wrong, your need to feel in control. He knew it intellectually, but knowing and being are two different things. And like all of us, he fell into the gap between knowledge and practice. Every investor faces that moment when logic says exit, but pride says wait. When your system says cut, but your ego whispers just a little longer. And in that whisper lies ruin. Dennis wasn't destroyed by bad trades. He was destroyed by hesitation, hesitation born from identity. He wasn't losing money, he was losing himself. And that, for a man defined by mastery, was unbearable. There's a myth in trading that emotions are the enemy. They're not. Denial is. Emotion gives you information. Denial blinds you from it. Dennis denied the feeling of fear until it consumed him. He denied humility until it became humiliation. He denied the possibility of being human, and the market reminded him that he was. Sometimes I wonder if that's the fate of all great thinkers: to be devoured by the very thing they tried to control. The mathematician by logic, the philosopher by thought, the trader by risk. We build systems to tame chaos, and then chaos enters through the one door we forgot to lock: our ego. Dennis later reflected, markets are designed to exploit human weakness. That's why most people lose, not because they don't know the rules, but because they can't follow them. That sentence is both humbling and terrifying, because it means the problem is never out there. It's always in here. You can learn every formula, every method, every pattern, and still fail, because systems don't fail. People do. Let's pause and think about that. If rules could guarantee success, we'd all be rich. But rules are only as strong as the hand that holds them. And that hand shakes when pride takes over. It's easy to be disciplined when you're winning. It's noble to be humble when you're wrong. But the real test is when you're right, again and again, and you start believing the rules apply to everyone except you. That's how kings fall. That's how Dennis fell. There's an old saying, the market gives, the market takes, but the ego destroys. And once you understand that, you start seeing ego everywhere in the way investors talk about their wins, in how they defend their mistakes, in the silence after they lose. It's not about money, it's about the illusion of control. Dennis once described the market as a mirror that never lies. When you look into it, you don't see prices, you see truth. If you're greedy, it shows greed. If you're fearful, it shows fear. If you're proud, it shows your downfall before it happens. The deeper you go into this world, the more you realize trading isn't about predicting markets. It's about predicting yourself, your impulses, your patterns, your cycles. The market is just a stage. You're both the actor and the script. And Richard Dennis, he wrote the perfect script, but forgot he was still human enough to change the ending. Even after the collapse, people still called him a legend, because legends are not defined by their victories. They're defined by the lessons they leave behind. And his greatest lesson wasn't how to trade, it was how to fall. He didn't run from failure. He faced it. He analyzed it. He owned it. And in that ownership, he found redemption. Because true greatness isn't in never losing, it's in losing consciously, with awareness, with humility, with grace. I remember a quote he gave in a later interview: "You can't erase mistakes, you can only outgrow them." Yes, that's the wisdom of a man who walked through fire and came out clearer. He didn't rebuild his fortune, he rebuilt his mind. He understood that markets change, systems fail, but principles remain. Principles like cut losses fast, ride winners longer, and above all, never confuse being rich with being wise. Today, people romanticize the story, the genius who made millions and lost them. But if you listen closely, the story isn't tragic, it's liberating. Because it frees you from the illusion that perfection exists. It teaches you that mastery is not about control, but about the willingness to start again, with less certainty, but more awareness. Dennis's art of losing wasn't about defeat. It was about evolution, the evolution from arrogance to understanding, from knowing everything to realizing you know nothing, from control to clarity. That's what made him truly great. Not the 200 million, but the moment he could look at zero and still see meaning. He once said quietly to a friend, "I used to measure success by numbers. Now I measure it by peace." That line captures everything money can't buy and everything wisdom can't fake. The market took his fortune, but it gave him something greater: insight. And maybe that's the ultimate trade of life. You lose what you think you need to gain what you truly are. There's a quiet transformation that happens after ruin. When the noise fades, the pride dissolves, and you're left alone with your thoughts. That's when clarity begins. For Richard Dennis, the silence after losing everything was not empty. It was full. Full of lessons that wealth had hidden, full of truths that success had muted, and full of a calm that no amount of money could ever buy. He used to chase control, every tick, every signal, every emotion. Now, he learned to chase stillness, because control is fragile. Stillness is eternal. He realized that what breaks most traders is not the market's unpredictability, it's their need for certainty. We crave order, but the market was never built to be ordered. It's built to reveal us, and the more you try to dominate it, the more it exposes who you really are. Dennis saw it clearly now. His system wasn't wrong, his psychology was. He designed a method for discipline, but forgot to design a method for humility. And without humility, even the best logic becomes a weapon against yourself. He once said in reflection, "The market isn't chaos, it's truth moving faster than we can accept." That line carries a weight few understand, because truth doesn't destroy you, your resistance to it does. Every loss, every crisis, every collapse is simply truth revealing what you refused to see. And that's why his story still matters. Because it's not about finance, it's about awareness. It's about the human condition, the eternal battle between control and surrender. Think of it like the ocean. You can't control the tide, you can only ride it. But ego makes you believe you can command the sea, and that illusion will drown you. Richard Dennis drowned once, but when he surfaced, he didn't swim against the current anymore. He learned to move with it. After stepping away from trading, he didn't disappear into bitterness. He became a quiet observer of markets, of people, of life. He gave lectures not about systems or signals, but about psychology, failure, and adaptation. He said, "Every rule you write is a reflection of your weakness. The market will find the one rule you can't follow and break you there." That realization was the essence of wisdom, the kind that only comes from losing everything. He began to see patterns beyond charts, patterns of behavior, cycles of human nature. Boom and bust weren't just economic, they were emotional. Greed expands until it collapses, fear contracts until it explodes. Markets move not because of logic, but because of the heartbeat of millions trying to outsmart one another. And the rare few who survive aren't the smartest, they're the calmest. One of his former students once asked, "So, after all these years, what's the single most important rule?" Dennis smiled and said, "Know when you're not the one in control." That was it. Not a trading strategy, not a mathematical model, just self-awareness. The market, he said, is a mirror for the mind. If you can't master the mind, the mirror will break you. There's a profound elegance in that philosophy. It applies to everything, in relationships, in careers, in life itself. We ruin things when we try to own them. We save them when we learn to let them breathe. Control suffocates. Awareness liberates. That's why the art of losing is not just a cautionary tale. It's a guide. It's the art of letting go before life takes it from you. It's learning to bow to what you can't command. In his later years, Dennis stopped giving advice on how to make money. He started talking about how to make peace. He told one interviewer, "If you really understand risk, you stop fighting it. You learn to coexist with it." That was the turning point. From trader to philosopher. He no longer wanted to win, he wanted to understand. Because when understanding deepens, the need to win dissolves. You stop chasing validation and start seeking truth. And truth doesn't shout, it whispers. It sits quietly, waiting for you to slow down enough to hear it. There's something deeply spiritual about that transformation. It's the same shift monks describe when they talk about detachment. You stop identifying with outcomes. You stop defining yourself by success. You start seeing gain and loss as two sides of the same wave. They come, they go, and through it all, you remain. That's the art, not the art of money, the art of mind. Dennis once drew a circle on a whiteboard during a talk. He said, "This is your control." Then he drew a much larger circle around it. "This," he said, "is reality." Then he pointed at the small one again. "The bigger this gets, the more you suffer." And the room fell silent, because everyone understood what he meant. The more you try to control life, the less you actually live it. He used to believe freedom came from mastery. Now he knew freedom comes from surrender. When you stop trying to bend the world to your will, the world stops resisting you. It flows, it breathes, it moves. And in that movement, you find peace. There's a quote he loved to repeat in his final interviews: "Markets will always test your patience, your faith, and your honesty, but they will never test your truth. That's yours alone." He had come full circle, from trader to teacher, from teacher to seeker, from seeker to silence. His journey wasn't about losing money, it was about losing illusions. Illusions of control, illusions of certainty, illusions of permanence. In that way, the art of losing isn't tragic. It's transcendent. It reminds us that destruction is often just transformation in disguise. You break not because you're weak, but because you've outgrown what no longer fits. And through the cracks, light enters. If you listen closely to his story, you'll hear something beyond finance, a rhythm, a pulse, a human truth, that sometimes to win again, you have to lose completely. You have to be emptied of arrogance, of noise, of self, before you can see clearly enough to start again. And when you do, you no longer chase wealth, you attract wisdom. That's the quiet power of the art of losing. It's not about falling, it's about awakening. There's a point in every life where success becomes a burden, when the thing you once chased now owns you. For Richard Dennis, that moment came quietly, not in the noise of the trading pit, but in the silence of realization. He saw that freedom was never about wealth, it was about detachment. Money had given him power, but it had also built invisible walls, walls made of identity, expectation, and fear of loss. He had been rich, then broke, then wise. And in the end, wisdom was worth more than either extreme. He said once, "I spent half my life learning how to win, the other half learning how to stop needing to." That's the paradox most people never solve. We build our lives chasing a version of freedom that chains us tighter to the outcome. The moment you need the result, you lose the essence of play. and markets, like life, only reward those who can still play. When Dennis looked back, he realized his greatest achievement wasn't turning thousands into millions. It was teaching others to think independently. Because real wealth isn't transferred in money, it's transferred in mindset. And that's what he gave the world. He taught a generation that discipline beats emotion, that systems beat stories, and that patience is the most underrated form of intelligence. But even beyond trading, he taught something deeper, that failure is not the opposite of mastery. It is the foundation of it. Without falling, no one ever truly stands. Without losing, no one ever truly understands. He used to say, markets don't care about you, but they can teach you everything about yourself. That sentence haunted him in later years, because he began to see how true it was, not just for traders, but for everyone. The market is life in motion, unpredictable, emotional, cyclical, relentless. It punishes arrogance and rewards awareness. It humbles the loud and elevates the quiet. It doesn't care who you are, what you believe, or how much you think you deserve. It only mirrors your truth. He spent his later years reading philosophy, not finance. Books on Stoicism, Buddhism, and behavioral psychology filled his shelves. He found more wisdom in Marcus Aurelius than in Wall Street reports. He began to live by a new kind of rule, one that wasn't about entries or exits, but about energy. He said, every decision is a trade. You exchange peace for control or control for peace. Choose wisely. It wasn't the voice of a trader anymore. It was the voice of a monk in a suit, a man who had touched both chaos and chosen silence. Sometimes he'd sit by a lake near his home and watch the ripples form on the surface. He said the market reminded him of water, always moving, never predictable, yet completely natural. You can't command the water. You can only respect it. He smiled when he said, all my life I tried to surf waves of data. Now I just watch the real ones. That's how evolution looks, not as noise, but as peace. You stop needing to prove, you start needing to understand. He was once asked, do you ever regret teaching others your system? He laughed softly. No, he said, systems can be copied, understanding can't. And that was his point all along. Trading was never about rules, it was about awareness, the ability to see clearly without distortion. And clarity can't be taught, only earned. He began writing private notes in his journals, reflections that were never meant for the public. One of them read, the first time I made money, I thought I had control. The second time I lost it, I realized I never did. Now I understand. Control is just comfort with uncertainty. That line, more than anything, defined his transformation. It's not about winning the game. It's about understanding why you play it at all. He would sometimes meet young investors who came to him for advice. They expected secrets, shortcuts, formulas. Instead, he told them stories about ego, emotion, and impermanence. He'd say, the hardest thing in trading isn't losing money, it's losing certainty. Once you accept that, you stop fearing the fall. He wasn't teaching charts anymore. He was teaching acceptance, and acceptance is the rarest kind of strength. The more he aged, the simpler his truths became. He stopped saying, be disciplined. He started saying, be honest. Because discipline without honesty is repression. But honesty, raw, brutal honesty, that's liberation. When you admit your greed, it softens. When you admit your fear, it fades. When you admit your pride, it dissolves. And what's left is clarity, the kind of clarity that no volatility can shake. He once wrote, every loss I ever took was tuition. Every win was a distraction. That's a line most people never understand until it's too late. Because winning makes you comfortable, comfort makes you blind. And blindness in finance or in life is fatal. The smartest people lose not because they're wrong, but because they're too certain they're right. And that's the essence of the art of losing. To see certainty as danger, to see failure as instruction, to see surrender not as giving up, but as seeing clearly. In his final talks, he said something profound. Success is an addiction. It makes you forget that you're mortal. He paused. Losing reminds you that you are. And that perhaps was the truest philosophy of all, because mortality brings humility, and humility brings wisdom. And wisdom, unlike wealth, doesn't vanish when the market closes. If you listen deeply, you'll hear a rhythm to his story. Rise, fall, reflect, renew. It's the same rhythm of every human life. We ascend on ambition, We collapse on arrogance. We rebuild on awareness. And if we're lucky, we wake up before the cycle repeats. Dennis woke up. He didn't rebuild a fortune. He rebuilt a soul. He once said quietly, "The goal is not to beat the market anymore. The goal is to stop letting it beat me." That's the sound of evolution, the voice of a man who no longer fights reality but flows with it. He traded the noise for balance, the adrenaline for awareness, the spotlight for silence, and in that silence he found something richer than all his millions: peace with himself. In the end, the art of losing isn't about markets at all. It's about the human spirit learning to coexist with uncertainty. It's about realizing that the only real wealth is the ability to stay calm in chaos. And it's about one man, once called the Prince of the Pit, who learned that the greatest victory is the one that doesn't need to be won.